Kravitz. If you have not followed his Triple H horse racing podcast, you're missing out. It's one of the best podcasts in the country.
Good evening and welcome to the HHH Racing Podcast, episode 7 of Horsin Around. I'm your host, Howard Kravitz. Thank you very much for joining us tonight as I'm joined by InTheMoneyMedia's handicapper and blog writer for Gulfstream Park, Mr. Chris Cupples, and co-host of Bet and Boozin', Charlie Freeman. We have a great show tonight as we're going to be talking about recapping the 4 big Kentucky Derby preps that happened this weekend throughout the country. And then at the end of the show, don't go anywhere because we're going to give our hot takes on the Bafford Churchill Downs situation. So we'd love to hear your comments and questions in the live chat. Please be very active there. Make sure you subscribe on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. After you do that, hit the notification bell so that you know when new content will arise. And smash that like button because every time you hit that like button, it sends the YouTube algorithm out for us and tells everyone they should join this show. Follow me on X right there at HKravitz and scrolling to the bottom of the screen, hkravitzhorse@gmail.com. Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Anchor. Power Pick Tip Sheet. Look below the video player for information on that. We also have a great website, hhhracingpodcast.com, and we are on Instagram as well, instagram.com/HHH Racing Podcast. All right, that takes care of the particulars. Before we start, let's meet Chris Cupples. Chris, thanks for joining the show. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the Kentucky Derby preps.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Grew up riding horses, and it kind of translated from the quarter horses, got into thoroughbreds, got some claimers. The handicapping, picking out claimers kind of took off from there. Next thing I know, I'm addicted and trying to do contest play and just learning as I go.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. It's great to have someone that's been in the business, not only handicapping behind the scenes and as a rider and whatnot. Chris, I'm sure you're going to bring us a lot of intel, and you do a great job within the Money Media on their blog. And if you read Chris's blog, you know that he's a horseman because of the words and vocabulary he uses and the deep dive intel that he has. Charlie, I know you're a big fan of Gulfstream Park. If you haven't checked out the Money Media blog and Chris's ideas, you should, because he's got favorites, but he always mixes in some prices as well, Charlie. And I know you're always looking for prices well, we won't mention what happened 2 weeks ago, but anyway, Charlie, big fan of Gulfstream, I know.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, especially after what's happened at Arlington and with, my grandparents living in Florida, it's basically become my new home track. Go there as often as I can. And yeah, as you touched on, as much as sometimes you have to eat a little chalk, I'm always looking for prices. So definitely a great track to cover and a fun place to be.
Absolutely. We got Katie is here. We got Sean Kane from Crownsway Racing Partner. What's up, Sean? Great Monday to y'all. What's up, Sean? Todd Harmon. There's a name I don't think I've seen too often in the chat. Looking forward to another great show. Todd, thank you very much. Please, if you are new to the show or even if you are very familiar with the show, get your friends around. Tell them let's go. Hit YouTube right now and check out. We'd love to hear people in the chat. And before we get started, guys, really quick, I would be remiss if I did not. Just want to say thank you. Thank you to all those people for your great shout outs. I had a nice score yesterday at Gulfstream Park. I sent the ticket out on X. And guys, sometimes I hesitate to do that because people say, you don't want to brag, you don't want to this and that. Look, you got to celebrate wins, Chris and Charlie, as you guys know for sure, especially a 5-digit score. And so that was very exciting for me, but I just want to thank everyone out there for the support and all the nice comments, because this is a really tough game. And so I'm not afraid to share my emotions and feelings. We all go through rough, spouts here and there. And so when you hit, it's nice that you got people in your corner to celebrate with you. So thank you to all you guys out there who commented on X. All right, guys, let's get right to it, guys. The first, we're gonna go in this order. We're gonna go Gulfstream, Oakland, New York, and then end with California. And the reason why we're ending with the California race is because that leads into our Baffert Churchill Downs Incorporated conversation. Chris, huge race, the Holy Bull out of Florida, and wow, I don't even know where to begin. We got big stories here. Let's just go ahead and show right now, as I'm going to bring on screen the result. Chris, let's first talk about if you recall your top 3 picks in this race, or at least your top pick, I'm assuming like everyone else, including myself and Charlie, was Fierceness.
Well, absolutely. And but after his Breeders' Cup performance, there wasn't nothing in here that would threaten him if he could run that race back. Obviously, he didn't. All the excuses on Twitter are pretty comical until the horse didn't run. That's the bottom line. I thought Domestic Product was the horse to use underneath Fierceness. Hade's got an easy lead. Hades, however you want to pronounce it. I don't want nothing to do with him when he shows up in the Florida Derby.
Wow. All right, there we go. Strong takes already. Chris being tough on the Florida bred, although I do agree with you. Charlie, Hades from the rail. We're going to show the replay. Look, the main conversation here is obviously Fierceness, and we're going to show the start, guys, because as you said, Chris, people have been talking about ad nauseum. I've heard people say like Johnny V gave a bad ride, and I've heard a lot of crazy, excuse my language, a lot of crazy shit, to be honest. I think, Charlie, I don't know your overall opinion, but I think Chris just nailed that in the head. Fierceness just didn't run well. I mean, it's pretty much that simple, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, the horse, I understand the horse didn't, Fierce didn't exactly break as ideal as you would have liked. And I think Johnny had touched on the horse kind of getting, not pinched in, but, a little stuck in at the beginning and then having to navigate wide. And, we were watching this race live, I mean, obviously off air, and talking about how, in the first quarter, the trip wasn't ideal. But after that, Fierceness had no excuses. The horse just wasn't able to execute, didn't get as, easier a dream trip as, what we saw in California by any means, but still wasn't having to work obsessive like crazy hard. And we touched on the pace was also very slow in that race, so it wasn't like Fierceness was just in a because we always talk about Gulfstream being the speedway. They weren't going all that fast. And Hades, credit to Paco Lopez, it was a perfect trip. I know when we cover this on Betting Booze, and I did give out Hades as the wild card in the race underneath, but I was thinking the wild card to maybe beat the others who had ran against each other by 2 or 3 lengths and still finish behind Fierceness by 6, 7. I wasn't imagining this horse going out to win. The second time out was impressive, but nothing, to speak to beating Fierceness.
Jeff Amster. Jeff, thanks for joining the show, buddy. They did increase the buyer, Chris. I don't know if you heard about that, to 90 from 85, although I still agree with you. Let's talk about the start here. Now, Chris, people say, well, there's an excuse. Well, how about Fierce just not breaking great? I mean, isn't that's self-inflicted? Now the 8 did come over a little bit, and we're going to show the head on in a minute. But I mean, if you're all that, aren't you supposed to break well from the gate? The fact of the matter is, Fierce is the 7, of course. He didn't break great, and he sort of put himself in this bit of a jackpot, don't you think?
Yeah, he balked a little bit going in the gate, which wasn't a good sign. I don't know if he's done that before, but I don't think so. But he's hard ridden to get out. And we're going a mile and 16. This ain't a 5 furlong sprint. A start like that shouldn't put a horse of his quality behind the 8 ball. You ain't got no excuse here.
Right here, Chris. And Charlie, we were watching this together. There was a group of us watching together. Chris, right here, I said he's got 0 excuses. Now, look, if you want to rip Johnny V because it was a slow pace, he didn't gun him to the lead. Look, you rode, Chris, although, not thoroughbreds, but whatever, you rode. As a handicapper, for me, he's in a perfect spot. Okay, he's a little bit wide. He's also 1 to 5. And to me, Chris, the biggest problem I have is what Charlie touched on. This was a very slow pace. Like, if he rushed up, Chris, into like a 23-1 46, okay, fine. What was the first quarter was like, we'll let it run here. The first quarter, I think, was like 24 and change. And the half was like 49 or something, like ridiculously slow pace. So he's got a monster hold. I mean, if you like Fierceness, aren't you very happy in this spot right here, Chris?
Absolutely. And I know Johnny V will give a bad ride every now and then because everybody does. It's a tough job. But we're talking about a Hall of Famer. He did exactly what he's supposed to do with a horse that broke slow.
No question about it. Now, I'm gonna go back, Charlie. I want to show the head on, and I'm gonna let you comment. Again, of course, Fierceness the 7. Charlie, how bad of trouble would you rate this right here?
Yeah, I mean, again, we'll watch the replay first. I mean, yeah, I would say it's not ideal, but I mean, you could almost argue, I mean, Domestic Product, didn't care as much because the horse was going to sit back, but I would argue the 8 shoving the 7 into the 6 was, honestly, I would argue the 6 almost took the worst of it. And the only reason it didn't matter as much if you were someone who on the 6 underneath was A, because you expected the horse underneath, and B, because the horse was going to sit off. But I don't think anything from Fierceness, it's not like he turned his head or anything, or, the jockey lost balance or anything where, we spotted the field a couple of lengths, which we've seen plenty of times for excuses. I mean, horses naturally miss breaks, and like Chris touched on, this isn't a sprint. If this is a 5.5 furlong race, I completely understand excuses. But by the
Yeah.
time they finished that slow first, and again, it was a slow first quarter. By the time it was over, it didn't take much for Fierceness to get right back up on the pace and then be able to execute otherwise.
I agree, and I mean, look, Chris, I read some things like Johnny V should at this point should have just like taken back and closed. What are people talking about? I mean, Fierceness is a speed horse. You don't want to take away his strength. And although the 8 was trying to keep him in there, he was able to extricate himself from that spot, Chris. I've got zero issues with Johnny V in this race. I think anyone who says that, frankly, is just off the reservation, in my opinion.
No, I agree. What business do I have telling Johnny B how to ride?
Well, that, I mean, any of us, right? I mean, that's
exactly.
I agree. So we'll go to the the end of the race here, Charlie. Sorry, hold on one second, guys. I'm gonna take it off the backstretch. He's very comfortable down the backstretch, 3 wide. I don't think anyone would have an issue with that. We'll go to the stretch, and the fact of the matter is, Charlie, I mean, you could say he was short, whatever. I mean, this is just a really poor effort in the stretch right here, Charlie. You got to think he's a winner, right?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, what I started to see is it doesn't look like Johnny V's having asked too much. And you can see already, Hades, who, by the way, I would argue did most of the dirty work. I understand the horse got to save ground on the rail, but still was setting. And then it looked like, initially Hades was starting to track back. And that's when we were all saying live, like, okay, Fierceness had that little incident early, and now the horse goes right by. And then Hades almost was like excited by the prospect of Fierceness not initially showing the ability to fly by, wanted the fight, and Fierceness didn't want any part of it. And actually, the only horse that looked interested in getting in on it was Domestic Product, who I think ran huge, honestly, considering the horse got shuffled back and then had to try to find a way to close into a race with also, again, no speed. I thought if any horse had the most excuses here, it's Domestic Product, who showed all the interest in the world, and Fierceness, who had basically every chance to make up for that somewhat rough start, just showed nothing down the stretch.
Chris, I actually thought Domestic Pro was going to win at the top of the stretch. I really did. I will give Hades some credit, Chris, people said he fought back. I mean, he didn't fight back because no one looked him in the eye, but he did extend on in the final 200 yards, and he did accelerate and look good. So I will give Hades credit for that, for fending off the champion and then continuing to go on. But again, it was a slow pace. So I'm not sure how I feel about Hades. I think he's going to have to improve a lot to be a factor going down the road.
I agree. And Domestic Product, at the 8 pole, what would you have made Domestic Product?
Yeah.
9 to 5. You're like, okay, this is over. The horse has no excuse either to me. You do early, but he wasn't that far back. And when he tipped out, he had every opportunity to finish and didn't. The
other thing I want to show here, guys, and I didn't really notice this until after the race. Look at the size of these horses. Okay, I don't know if you. Let me go full screen. Everyone look very carefully. Hades is bigger than Fierceness, guys. I mean, bigger and taller. I don't know if you can see their heads there, but Hades is bigger horse, and Domestic Product towers over Fierceness. So, from what you know about being around, you can see it right there. Can you guys sort of tell? Look how much bigger Hades is, taller. Look how much taller they are, right? Which in theory means a longer stride. In your professional opinion, Chris, and being around horses. Sure, horses can get distance if they're a little smaller, but I don't like that for Fierceness to go, 10 panels if he's not really a bigger size or a longer size horse. That's something that I noticed on the head-on. Any thoughts on that?
It depends on to more of me. It is bound on their reach and stride. Like Domestic Product's got a beautiful stride.
Yes, he does. It almost turfy. I wonder if they're going to go to the turf them at some point, but we're going to see. The last thing, Charlie, then we're going to move on. Todd Pletcher does not bring his horses to the race short. And this, okay, maybe he needed one, but Charlie and Chris, he was outworking Locked, who I know I'm a big fan of, and so is you, Charlie.
Me too. Yeah.
Consistently at Payson. And Chris, and so he was working well by every measure. It just seems like to me, I'll just end by saying this and let you guys have a final word. I'll move on. Fierceness seems to need his own way in every way, shape, and form. And if he doesn't get his own way, he's not going to run well. It's pretty obvious that that's happened in his 4 starts. This is a huge negative for me going forward, this horse. Charlie?
Yeah, the 2 things I'll say is, number 1, look, I tried to give the horse the benefit of the doubt after, Fierceness freaked in LA and California, and just thought, maybe the slop wasn't for him, which is very fair. But the word I wrote, I wrote down notes about each race to talk about. And the word I wrote in all caps for this race was adversity. that's the thing that stuck with me more than anything. And I've seen some people in the chat touch on it, how, the Derby is a 20 horse field. So obviously part of my language, but a lot of shit can happen when you have a field that big. And so the reality is if you have a horse that doesn't show any sort of interest or ability to deal with adversity, for me, that's a massive red flag. And I would especially, look, if Fierceness is one of those horses that's just going to freak or be bad every other race, still, regardless, that's too risky for me to want to touch this horse going forward. But there was no one in this field that really excites me. I would just say more so good on Hades for getting it done, good on Domestic Product in a slow pace for showing interest. But there's no one here that I really was like, that's a real contender.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, congratulations to Hades, though. It is pretty cool as a Florida
Oh,
bred.
of course.
We're going to go ahead and move on here, guys. I'm doing a little bit of stuff behind the background here. Okay, we're going to go on to Oakland. Mystic Dan, Chris. I mean, this is a breakthrough effort. Now, it was the inside was a better part of the track, and what an unbelievable ride by Brian Hernandez on Mystic Dan. As I'm going to go ahead and show the results here. Mystic Dan runs very well, gets a 101 buyer. I don't really know where this effort came from, Chris. He ran very well. I don't want to take anything away from him, but he's really never passed horses, and he ran fantastic, especially in the stretch. I'll just go ahead and show his PPs here. That was an aberrational race, but maybe the peaks got him in the right direction now, Chris.
Well, and that's the thing. The sloppy track is what's going to stand out to me when we get to the Derby, depending on what he does in the Arkansas Derby. If it rains, let's say it rains that day, and Mystic Dan runs off the screen again in the slop, and we get to the first Saturday May, and it's a dry track. I'm going to question it. It was a great ride by Hernandez, no doubt. And we finished strong. The horse wasn't asked for his best at any point. He got a good trip, but he got the trip that was there. It's.
No doubt. He's the 10 horse, and Brian Hernandez had a big day, by the way. Charlie, this is a fantastic job. He's in the green. This is the big move right here, Charlie, where he uses enough horse to get over in front of Liberal Arts right here, but not so much that he expends too much energy. And from that point forward, he just stayed on the rail the whole time. And then at the end of the race, of course, he comes up the rail, and he really shot through. Look at this. He's got a monster hold. Charlie, if you got the 10 right now, you got to be pretty excited.
Yeah, what I wrote down about this race was obviously an unbelievable ride executed, and honestly, compared to the race we covered before, the fractions were reasonable. And again, obviously, being a sloppy track, you're going to have to factor that in for the future. But that was my main takeaways. Normally I'd be concerned if a horse got a dream trip like this, and then maybe wins by a nose or a length against a horse that had to work a lot harder, and you're like, that's a horse I would avoid. But as you touched on, he had a tight hold on the horse, and Mystic Dan had plenty of horse left down the stretch, and without being asked, just rolled away from the field. So for me, don't get me wrong, the trip certainly made it easier, but that's where I'd pay attention to again, is maybe the slot made the horse freak or not, but it was an impressive performance because Mystic Dan was much the best. It wasn't just the trip. I mean, he had so much horse stuff down the stretch against other horses who still got good trips and ran on well. Like Just Steel got a perfect trip as well, and still ran out in respectable second. I thought Liberal Arts also did really well in that spot, kind of was forced to sit a little farther back because of Mystic Dan and was rolling. Those two were clear cut second and third, but I mean, Mystic Dan was dominant.
I mean, Chris, call me crazy. I would be more interested in Mystic Dan going forward than Fierceness. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. His acceleration when the hole opened, I know like we just said, he got the dream trip on the rail, but when the hole opened, he shook the reins and he powered through and pulled away.
Oh, I mean, it was really impressive. I'd like to see it again. Chris, as a handicapper, I'd probably be against him the next time. If it came up sloppy, I'd be more with him. But I do want to see it again. Apparently, guys, he's waiting to the Arkansas Derby. So I don't. That's a whole other conversation. I would run my horse. I don't know. But they're going to skip the Rebel and go to the Arkansas Derby. He's still going to need points, I believe, to get into the Derby. But I think they just figure they're going to get it at the Arkansas Derby. Mystic Dan, very interesting. Your thoughts on Just Steel, Charlie, for the coach, Dwayne Lucas? I mean, he runs well. He seems a bit one pace to me. Might actually be better for like a race like the Belmont, where he can just sort of click off those 12-second fractions, because he doesn't seem to have a burst. But he's a very nice horse, and he was a little bit wide in this race too.
Yeah, no, I think Just Steel again is also. I mean, again, for me, this race was tough because I genuinely think, like, if you're the owner, if you're someone who bet on or is following the path of Just Steel or Liberal Arts, I think you're very pleased with both horses, because again, I mean, if Mystic Dan doesn't freak, I mean, the two of them were still much clearer of the rest. And again, Liberal Arts, I mean, I'm sorry, Liberal Arts, Just Steel kind of, I don't want to say did the dirty work, but, was still sitting right up on that speed. And again, as you mentioned, was a little wide. I still thought it was a very solid trip. But I would argue out of the top three finishers had to do the majority of that earlier work. And still, the fact that the horse was able to finish on strongly and, was able to hold off Liberal Arts, who came flying late, I still think that's a performance you can absolutely build on. I mean, again, if we're talking about horses trending in different directions, I'm not saying either of those two are better than Fierceness, but at least there's more positives you can take away about about the top three in that race than there is Fierceness. And there's going to be a hell of a lot more value.
Steve Siminovich, what's up? Steve said he loved the mud. Rail was best. He worked well in the mud, missing no training down fairgrounds. That's a good point. They had a little bit of weather, Chris, at Oakland, so they missed some training. And Stolen Breezing said Mystic Dan probably moved up on the wet track. Didn't take a deep breath. I like how versatile. Absolutely. I think there's some interesting things to look. And the last thing I'll say, move on, Chris, and Charlie knows this. I was completely against Carbone, the speed, and I was against the Baffert. There looked like a lot of speed in this race, and I'm just against Chris horses that just seem to have one way to go and don't pass. And I will readily admit, I thought Mystic Dan was one of them, but I knew Carbone was one of them, and I knew Windsock was one of them. These are just bet against especially when there's small prices in these big field preps, Chris, in my opinion.
I agree. I didn't have a strong opinion in the race, and I did the work since it was a prep. And nothing stood out to me. And if you read my blog on InTheMoneyPodcast.com, you'll see if I get to a race and I've done the work, if I spend an hour on it and I don't have an opinion, I have no problem passing.
Yes. And that's a really good point, Chris. And Charlie, Chris talks about that a lot in the blog. Look, if you don't like a race, there's no law that says you have to bet it. So feel free to pass. Let's go to New York, guys. We're just going to talk about this race very quickly. I don't think any of these horses are really that fascinating going forward in the bigger races, but it was a grade 3. It was points, so let's just talk about it very quickly. Uncle Heavy, a Pennsylvania bred, beats the pretty heavy favorite Light Line for Brad Cox, who went off at 6-5 in this race. El Grande, who I was personally against and ran a pretty good race, although the pace wasn't that quick on a slow track, ran a good second. Uncle Heavy for Sanchez comes over the top. Chris, we'll just go ahead and show the stretch, and I'll let you talk about anything else if you like. I do want to say that the one Speedrunner is a horse I want to talk about because he had some trouble. But anyway, what do you see in the stretch here with Uncle Heavy, Chris?
Uncle Heavy, and when he did his job, he kind of grinds away here on the heavy track. He lugs in a bit on his left lead, so he has some room to improve. I'll be honest, me and Winter Aqueduct do not get along. I could. Kentucky Joker winning yesterday was a prime example.
Yeah,
my handicapping is off up there. I usually refer to Nick Tamaro or Andy and see who they like in a race if I have to play a race. I don't know what to do with horses off this heavy track. I don't know what to do with them coming into races.
Yeah, it's been like raining for weeks. It feels like in New York. We haven't seen there's the one, by the way, who I do want to talk about, Charlie. I'll show you why. Light Line, it was a weird race, Charlie. I don't really know what to make of it. It was sort of slow. Again, 84 is just not going to get it done. Maybe these horses at best right now, Charlie, could compete in like your West Virginia Derbies or Ohio Derbies, one of those smaller level, Derbies over the summer. But these are not Triple Crown race candidates as of now.
No, I was out of the 4 races. I mean, I know when we get to the Cali that it was kind of a one-horse race, but this was the one that moved me the least. I mean, I know we talked about, Gulfstream not being, as big as we were hoping it was going to work out, but this was just a tough watch for me. I felt the 4 got an absolute dream trip. I thought the jockey did a terrific job. El Grandeo had no excuses, set a perfect pace, and then just off the turn, I know the horse only narrowly lost, but with the trip that El Grande had, if the horse was any good, should have been able to win going away. I mean, again, I as I wrote down, credit to Uncle Heavy. It was a great performance. Kind of like Chris touched on. Seems more like a grindy horse, was just able to keep digging in and, clunk along and pass other horses that were tiring and then get up. I thought Light Line honestly had no excuses. I know the horse was a little too far back, but I mean, look, as you showed in the replay, Light Line was right with Uncle Heavy. So, if the jockey had the horse, there's no reason Light Line couldn't have gone by to win. And then as you touched, I'll let you go into it a little more, but you had talked about when we were watching this race before and you thought Speedrunner was interesting. But I remember you called it as it happened, that if the 2 didn't get out of the way, after you said it was a good idea for the 1 to save ground on the rail, you said, well, if that 2 is going to move over, he's got to go wide now or else he's going to get steadied. And then 2 seconds later, the 2 moves inside right in front of him. The 1 gets steadied. And we both were like, yeah, well, he's done.
Charlie, I only had two good opinions all weekend because other than the pick 4 and that particular opinion you just mentioned where Speedrunner was going to get checked, my other handicapping was crap. And Chris, that's the crazy thing about this game, right? You only have to be right once, on a weekend. But Charlie, you're exactly right. I just want to mention Speedrunner for everyone out there. Whisper Hill Farm. This is the same connections as Tapit Trice. That's not why I like the one, by the way. I went 1-3 only, Chris, in this race. This race knocked me out of the pick 5, I'll be very honest. But Speedrunner, the one, is a Pletcher who I think does have some upside. He just broke his maiden. He got checked badly on the backstretch. Just look out for Speedrunner, maybe in an allowance next time, maybe at a price, Chris, because the running line is going to look bad out of that race.
Yeah, and I thought he ran well the race prior when he broke his maiden.
Yeah.
It impressed me. It was kind of like Arkansas. I did not have a strong opinion. My biggest takeaway from this race is Seminole Chief should have stayed and run in Florida.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. Look, it was a slow race. I think we're going to move on, but congratulations to the Pennsylvania bred. All right, now, strap it in, everyone. We're going to talk about California for about 5 or 6 minutes, the race. And then Charlie and Chris, I'm going to let you guys give a hot take real quick, like 30 seconds, 45 seconds. And Charlie, you don't have to comment, by the way. It's up to you if you'd like to comment on the Baffert CDI. Obviously his horses are not allowed to be in the Derby this year. And then I have about a 3-minute speech I'd like to give about my opinion, and then we'll end the show. Chris, I think it's very fair to say the best 3-year-old in the country right now is trained by Bob Baffert, and that is Nisos. Nisos is, I'm not going to say freak, but he is really, really good. He is really fast. He had a 2-turn test in the Robert B. Lewis. The field, I will say, was really not that impressive. So to me, that's a bit of a negative, but you can only beat who you can beat, Chris. And he did it very well. He got a 105 buyer after a 96 and a 97, went off at 1-9 in this race. He is a serious horse. I guess the only question, Chris, is can he get, a mile and eighth, a mile and a quarter when it really matters? But as of now, this horse has done absolutely nothing wrong. He's the 6th horse in this race as I make the screen smaller and we show. Chris, I'll just let you talk about this Bob Baffert superstar.
Yeah, I think he improved here as obviously he should have had. He toyed with these horses. And you'll see in the stretch, he just powers away at wheel gear down. He run about a half a second off what Cody's Wish ran at Breeders' Cup.
Yeah.
My following and playing in Santa Anita has not been full blown this year, but the track has played fair and consistent on a daily basis as long as it was dry. I know this is a superb race. He just he just cuts loose whenever he wants to right here.
Yeah, I mean he does set a nice trip. This is not the strongest field. Okay, so I don't want to keep harping on it, but the fractions were quick. This is 46-3. Now I know Sandy is fast, Charlie, but it's still pretty quick. The fact that he's in hand, Charlie, and rating in behind is a very scary thought for the rest of the 3-year-olds in this country, because it's clear that although he's fast, he is able to rate and trackable. And once he gets to the outside, Charlie, it is all over.
No, I remember when we were talking about it, we were laughing as we were watching this replay live because we knew so far in advance. And not, I get it, it's 1-9, so it should be obvious.
Look at the acceleration, Charlie.
But,
just puts 3 on the field, just like that.
When you're watching a horse and they're not even at the final turn and you see the horses in hand but naturally gliding past the other horses, and you can already start laughing and saying we know what's going to happen before the horse is even fully, become a rocket ship and launched by everyone, that's when you have a freak. We talk about it in other sports like basketball, football. You just see those, young athletes in college where you're like, that's a freak athlete. That's what you could say about Nisos. This horse is a freak athlete, absolutely every which way. Did not have to be asked at all. Pratt navigated a perfect trip, was able to sit off. And again, as you touched on, that was the big thing for me as well, is knowing that the horse did show the ability to be able, he was able to sit a few lengths off the lead and then just glide by with no hesitation. Didn't really need to be asked. Wasn't concerned about that at all. And, it was a pretty hot pace to have to go into, and it wasn't as a closer, was stalking a pretty hot pace and effortlessly just flew by everyone and made it genuinely look like when you see, like as if it was like a Derby horse against like claimers. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, he was really good. I am going to push back on something. Michael Austin, who was our guest last week, and he lives out by Santa Anita and is a big fan of California racing. Michael, I completely disagree with this thought. He said the field is stronger than any other Derby prep field this week besides the Southwest. He said besides the Southwest. You know what, Michael? I'm going to take that back. I would put it on par with the Holy Bull. I don't know. I mean, Wind Me Up is a horse, Chris, that is a Baffert that's okay. I mean, you can see what you don't see it. Scatify actually ran a pretty big race, got a 91. I guess there's decent horses in this race, but whatever. You know, Niso's just made these decent horses look really bad, Chris.
Well, Wind Me Up got beat by Moot. That's enough for me to downgrade him.
Yeah.
And then he gets beat by Winstock, who goes to Arkansas and just embarrasses Baffert, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think there was much here, but it doesn't matter. The performance is what we see with our eyes. What's behind him at that point really doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't. He did it so well. I think Stolid Breezing, this is a good point. Chris, I'm assuming you've been a horse racing fan for a long time. Shared Belief was one of my favorite horses of all time. And I think he gets lost in the shuffle because he got screwed in the Breeders' Cup, as we all know, against Bayern. I don't want to go back to that. But anyway, he was super talented. I loved this horse. He got injured. Didn't quite maximize his potential, but he had like a sort of real quick turn of foot. That's what Niso's, the turn of foot that he has, I'm talking about Niso's now, is almost turf-like, which as a dirt horse, Chris, is just flat out scary.
And then when he powered away with just very little urging, and the horse wants to run, and you don't know how many gears he has. The only caution is sometimes when horses like that are asked to run, they fold up. But that's not a Baffert trade, I promise.
Yeah, Michael Austin. This race obviously was a lot faster, but other than, well, the other horses ran better. So this race was better, was deeper than the Holy Bull, but I think the top few, I mean, Fiercest should have been much better, but he wasn't. So it didn't end up being that way. We'll see what happens going forward. But there are some nice West Coast horses other than Nisos. Obviously, Baffert's got another horse, Charlie, that won at 6 furlongs. We have no idea what that horse is. I'm not a fan of Muth, Chris. I don't know your opinions on some of the other Bafferts. We're going to get into that right now because we're going to talk about the situation. Muth, to me, I've never thought was really that good a two-turn horse. I know he ran okay in the Breeders' Cup, but I don't think that's a horse that's going to be a factor in the Triple Crown races, in my opinion. So we're going to see. Let's get a few other quick comments, guys, from the chat, and then we'll let you two speak about the Baffert Churchill Downs owner situation. Then I'll end the show with mine. Let's see. Solid Breezing. If Connections really wanted Derby, they should have moved to a different trainer. Here we go. Before the deadline, only can blame themselves. Fans just upset. Talented 3-year-old has no chance at the Roses. Gary Killaroso. It'll be very difficult for the Kentucky Derby winner to then win the Preakness versus fresh Bafferts. I agree with that, Gary. If a horse pulls that off, wow, what a Belmont that would be. He says Bafferts plural. Chris and Charlie, I don't know your opinion, but as of this moment, to me, the only real Baffert, there's only two. This monster. And I do like Coach Prime, who was scratched out of the race. I think he's got upside. He worked well with Nisos. To me, those are the main two. I don't really see others right now, at least in my opinion. Let's see there. It's Maymun is the horse that won it. But a lot of horses freak at 6 furlongs. So I'm going to hold my reservation for that. As we come to the end of the show here in about 10 minutes, Charlie, I'm going to let you go first. Let me just give, unless people have been living in a cave, it's very simple. Churchill Downs decided to extend their suspension against Baffert another year. The owners had until January 29th, I think that's the date if I recall, to move the horses off of Baffert into someone else. If they had done that, Charlie, they could run at Churchill Downs in the 150th running of the Kentucky Derby. Every single owner this year decided not to. Last year they did move some horses, practical move, etc. Charlie, your thought, just very briefly, on should Churchill have let that go? Number one, and number two, if you had owned some of these Bafferts, would you have moved your horse to someone else?
All right. Well, first thing I want to address real quick when you were talking about the other Bafferts, I will say I know people in the chat have touched on it as well. I'm not moved by Coach Prime personally. I haven't seen the third horse that we touched on run at all, but I watched Coach Prime. I think the horse is decent. I'm not saying the horse isn't talented, but that's not one where I'm upset like I am about Nisos, because I think Nisos could genuinely be the best 3-year-old colt. I think Nysos could win the Kentucky Derby, absolutely. And it's like you touched on. For me, I have no issue with Churchill Downs. If they want to suspend a guy who's been caught doing a variety of different things, who's controversial, who's is trying to stay in the spotlight however he can, I'm not a fan of Bob Baffert. So I have no issue with that. He's a hell of a trainer, but he's not a great person. And so the reality is, being great at something while breaking rules shouldn't equal, oh, but because he's great, we make exceptions. My issue is with the owners. I understand a lot of these owners, and look, I don't think this is offensive to say. It's just a fact that a lot of them are loaded, so they can afford to just throw money in horses. And for them, from the fan perspective, it is annoying to see them not running the Derby. But for them, if they want to just trust Baffert and keep winning any other race besides the Derby and win a lot of races that way, and have more guaranteed wins and easier competitions to get to take a picture in the winner's circle and show themselves off, then good for them. But for me, as a pure fan of the sport, I hate that. I think you're running from an opportunity. I think you're running from a fight. I think you're running from the opportunity to have, your horse and Nysos. So I think it's unbelievable to go against the best. And look, for the owners of the other Bafferts, I part of my friends, I don't give a shit. Do what you want. If you want Baffert with some other horse, fine. But with a horse like Nysos, I just think it's wrong for the horse and it's wrong for the fans in the game. I think the horse is way too talented to not get a fair opportunity. And again, as you said, they were given a deadline. It's not like this was something that caught them out of nowhere where they were just like, okay, yeah, we've just decided. They were given a heads up and a warning. And, I would say, oh, maybe you asked Churchill to give them an extended deadline to think it over again. But the fact that you said every single one of them decided not to speaks volumes to me that they already kind of had a predetermined decision they're not going to, which, again, to me is stupid. I think there's plenty of other trainers in this country that are capable enough. I'm sure Bob Baffert's done great with this horse, but I don't think it's like the horse only needs Bob Baffert to be this good. When you have that much natural talent and you're a freak athlete, there's certainly other trainers that can make this horse win the Derby. So that's kind of how I see it.
Charlie, appreciate your opinion. We welcome any opinions in the chat. Of course, keep them appropriate. But if you have any thoughts on, but we don't want to make this personal. Let's just talk about the issue, everyone. So if you have thoughts about Churchill or Baffert, please feel free to put them in the chat. Chris, your overall thoughts on this really unfortunate. It's an unfortunate situation, really, no matter which side you really land on here.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. And without choosing sides or getting into who's wrong, who's right, to me, the biggest thing here is the industry. We're going to get to Kentucky Derby Day, and we're going to get all the media outlets coming in that usually don't cover horse racing. All they're going to talk about is Baffert not running in the Derby, this lawsuit, and this pissing match they both have with each other. I wish they would settle it, however, and move on for the industry as a whole.
I think Chris, we all would agree with that. I don't think anyone who's reasonable thinks this whole situation is good. Well, I think you'll hear my comments here in just a minute. So, Chris and Charlie, really appreciate. Don't go anywhere, guys, because I'm going to talk for about 3 minutes. I'm going to put myself only on screen just for emphasis, not because I need it for my ego. But I'm just going to talk for a few minutes. You guys stay on screen, and then we'll come back and end the show. So, here's my opinion, ladies and gentlemen. And look, I don't have to give any opinion at all, but I feel like as the host of a podcast that's become, relatively popular on YouTube, and we have great fans, I think I owe it to everyone to at least say something about the situation. And if you completely disagree with me, that's fine. It's a free country. Feel free to disagree. I know right now in the chat, it's very lively. Please keep your comments coming. And again, if you disagree with me or agree with me, feel free in the chat. But I do want to say a few things because I do feel very strongly about this issue. First of all, I have no dog in this fight. I've never met Bob Baffert. I don't know him personally. The guy's obviously one of the best trainers in the history of our sport. He's tied for first. He's won 6 Kentucky Derbies. And believe me, and you guys know, he's going to win another one after this year. We all know it. He's got weight to it. The stock he has is incredible. He's an excellent trainer, obviously. And so he's going to break the record at some point for sure. But I have no personal dog in the fight. Now, for full disclosure, as most people know, I do have a big future bet on Sierra Leone. But here's the thing I want everyone to keep in mind, because I know someone's going to say, well, you need Sierra Leone to win, so you don't want any of the Bafferts. If Sierra Leone is a closer, which it appears that he is right now, I wouldn't mind having more speed in the race. I mean, I want a lot of early speed in the race to set it up for Sierra Leone if Sierra Leone is good enough to make it to the starting gate. As of now, he's not even in the starting gate. So if people want to say, well, of course you don't want Baffert in there because that's a threat to Sierra Leone. Okay, fair statement, but the Baffords are going to show a lot of speed, and I've got a closer. So I can argue that a bit. Ray Pollock, who is an excellent writer for Horse Racing Nation and other places, to me gave a ridiculous and insulting statement in his recent article, who said they should call this upcoming Derby 149 and a half. Come on, man. Look, throughout the years, some of the best horses have not run in the Derby. Did they call last year Derby 148 and a half because Forte didn't run? No. It's a complete insult to all the fantastic horses and trainers throughout the country, including ones that are in the West Coast that are not trained by Baffert, to diminish this race by calling it 149 and a half. Now, if you want to say the race is diminished because Nisos might not be in there or won't be in there, fine, I understand that, but we don't know that Nisos is going to get 1.25 miles, and it's a damn horse race with 20 horses. So let's stop anointing Nisos as the Derby champion right now, because although he's clearly the best right now, to me that is a ridiculous statement with a lot of other talented horses, and we're still 3 months out. So this is not Derby 149 and a half. And of the 170,000 people that are going to be there, along with myself and all the betting and boozing guys, I think 168,000 will be cheering loudly and be very happy to be there for the Derby, and frankly won't care that much that 1 or 2 horses from Bafford won't be there. Baffert is not bigger than the sport, and let me say, Churchill Downs is not bigger than the sport. And let me comment on Churchill Downs quickly. I don't know their management personally. And if you know me, if anyone's going to have a gripe with Churchill Downs, it would be me and all the other people who live in Chicago. Arlington Park was 20 minutes away from me, and now it's a pile of rubble. So I would have every right to start ripping on Churchill Downs and CDI in general, although that situation was not all Churchill Downs. There's a lot of factors involved in that situation. But everyone that I've met from Churchill Downs has been nothing but classy and fantastic to me in this podcast, including Darren Rogers and Kevin Kirstein in media relations. They're on-air talent with Joey Dack, Kevin Kilroy, Scott Shapiro. These are fantastic people. So if people want to rip on Churchill Downs, that's fine. All I can say, the people that I've been associated with and know have been nothing but first class. Could they have handled the situation better? Probably. Do they regret anything? I don't know. You'd have to talk to their ownership. But to me, here's the situation, and I'll end my statement with this fact. And I side more with Charlie in this thought. These owners, have every right not to move their horses off of Bafford. Zidane and all these guys, they're millionaires, okay? These horses, Nisos, etc., have one shot, people. One shot to win the Kentucky Derby. That's it. They're only 3-year-olds once. I understand they don't want to move off of Bafford. Aren't there other good trainers in California, even if they want to keep them in California? Doug O'Neill has won the Derby twice. You don't think Richard Mandela can get a horse ready for the Derby? I know he hasn't won the Derby. Phil D'Amato is mainly a turf guy, but you don't think he can train a dirt horse? John Sadler trained Flightline. You don't think John Sadler can get a horse to win the Derby? To me, it's completely asinine. And if people want to say, well, it's asinine for Churchill, that's fine. That's your opinion. I agree with Charlie. They should have moved. The ownership decided for 3 months to bite the bullet and move their horse to another trainer. And for people to say, well, now the horse can't win Horse of the Year, this and that. Arcangelo did not run in the Derby, and Mage won the Derby and did not win Horse of the Year. So Nisos and anyone else will have plenty of opportunity to blow away these other 3-year-olds in the Preakness, in the Belmont, in the Travers, in the Breeders' Cup, wherever else. I think it's a shame that it's all happened. I blame both sides to some extent, but to me, the onus is more on the owners. When you have Bob Baffert as your trainer, that's a keg of dynamite. And as good as he is, he's had some issues. There's no denying that. And so they know that going into it. They knew there was a deadline. They didn't move the horses. It's just a damn shame for everyone involved. But in general, I wish that these owners would have moved their horses to a different trainer for 3 months. There you go. That is my opinion. Let me bring on my co-host back on the screen. Chris and Charlie, I'll let you have a quick rebuttal or any quick thoughts. Chris, you first about what I'd say, and then we'll wrap up the show.
You pretty much wrapped it up there. I wish if they don't solve it this year, which is highly unlikely, I really hope we get it solved by next year's Derby.
We will, because this is Derby 150, Chris. You could say, I was going to say they don't want the aggravation. They don't want the distraction. Maybe this is actually a bigger aggravation and distraction than having the silver-haired Bob Baffert in the stands. But Charlie, anyway, look, it's going to happen once. I think we're all going to move on after this Derby. And I think the big thing for me, like I said at the end, Nice House and all these other horses, they'll have plenty of chance to prove that they're superior throughout the year after the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, no, I think you kind of touched on it and kind of reiterated a lot of what I said about how the owners had plenty of opportunities. And I agree. And look, honestly, I feel like this honestly kind of leads to more controversy and hurts Churchill more than it does Baffert, because the reality is, as upset as I'm sure he is that he doesn't get to be in this, at the end of the day, he gets the exact media attention he still wants from this with all the controversy. Because what he wants is, it's not that he's selfish and about him, it's that he wants the attention to be drawn to, the angles of, free Bob Baffert, give him his chance, let him back out there. They're holding him and his horses back. Like anything where it makes him kind of look like the innocent guy that's getting held back and avoid from like the controversy that he's been involved in. They say any publicity is good publicity. He's getting good publicity from this. But I also do know deep down, as you mentioned, from what he's done for the sport, he wants to be able to train horses that are in the Derby. He doesn't want to be suspended. That's what matters to him most of all. I want them to settle their differences. As you said, there's issues on both sides. But again, I think the biggest takeaway is the owners could easily find someone else qualified especially for Nice House, a horse of that caliber. And I think they could have gone elsewhere if they wanted to.
I agree. Jim Pilares, who's one of our big fans, Chris, as you know, from Buffalo, said, "Nice job on the show, Chris. I enjoy the work you do on In the Money. It was nice to match a face and voice with the excellent written work." I could not agree. Let's end on a positive note. I could not agree more with Jim Pilares, Chris. Guys, it was a lot of fun. And again, if those of you that watch this show and listen later on as replays, please comment down below the video player on your thoughts of any of these prep races or on the situation right now. But I think we all would like to I think we all agree. Let's just move on. Let's move on from it. It's happened. It's done. Let's focus on these beautiful horses that are running throughout the country, because it's going to be very exciting going forward into the 150th Run for the Roses in the first Saturday of May. All right, so that wraps it up for my wonderful guest on In the Money Media, Gulfstream blog writer Chris Cupples and co-host of Bettin' and Boozin', Charlie Freeman. This has been your host, Howard Kravitz, episode 7 of Horsin' Around. Please join us this Wednesday and Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, for some fantastic shows regarding handicapping the Super Bowl, New York, and a big stakes day at Tampa Bay. Crush your bets, just like I did on Sunday, wherever you play. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great night. Bye-bye.
If you have not followed his Triple H horse racing podcast, you're missing out. It's one of the best podcasts in the country.